Hey everybody, this is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot. With me is our recurring guest, geopolitical expert, author, and blogger, Jared. Hey Jeff, how you doing today?
All right, I hate the word expert, but go carry on.
Well, you're more expert than the so-called experts. Jeff, before we take a deep dive into the leaked audio of the Chinese military planners and an update on Russia, tell us a little bit about your books, your blog, before we go into the other subject matter.
Yeah, Nyquist.blog, and my most recent book is The Fool and His Enemy, and my first book was The Origins of the Fourth World War. So I encourage people to read. I've got a bunch of books I've co-authored with a group of people, and of course, my blog kind of covers what's ongoing in the crisis in the world right now. I'm in touch with people in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine and China, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on out there, as it appears that war is looming on the horizon for all of us.
So they're coming.
Well, what's funny is I was invited to a online meeting uh, um, with a Chinese defector, originally from Shandong, China, uh, Dr. Li Meng Yan, who had just received the day before or sometime shortly before that this leaked audio that they were then trying to distribute to media and get people to look at. And I've helped to spread it around to get a lot of people to look at it. And so far, the third largest newspaper in India has written about it, saying they cannot find anything that says this is a fraud, that this looks authentic. Retired people from the intelligence communities in two countries have told me they think it's authentic. Um, I've had more than one person who speaks Chinese has heard it and has expressed with dismay that the voices have the correct accents. They're the appropriate age. The way they speak is the way people of that age group from the Communist Party speak to each other in meetings. Um, so right now, the verdict is this thing is authentic, and this thing is about a mobilization order come down from the Communist Party Central Committee of China and the Central Military Commission to mobilize China for the final war, for what they call the People's War and the People's War at Sea, becoming kinetic, right?
Well, and when we were talking offline, you expressed concerns not only in an offline conversation with me, but also on a recent interview that I watched. And you had mentioned that this is actually not really directed so much against Taiwan as reality against the United States. And I had been doing some research, and according to one article on www.wionews.com, there was a very interesting quote here. Where by the military planners, we won't hesitate. Part of the transcript of the meeting, we won't hesitate to start a war, crush Taiwan's independence, and strong enemies' plots. And that to me spells that they're also coming after the United States directly. But you've done some analysis and some searching. Can you elaborate on why you think that this is actually directed against the United States?
Yeah, there's at this meeting are the leading military and civil officials of Guangdong province, which is part of the Southern Theater Command, which used to be one of the major military districts, but now they have 5 theater commands. It's the Southern Theater Command. It faces south into the South China Sea towards Indonesia and the Philippines. It is not opposite Taiwan, which is interesting. They are being called upon to mobilize not just military assets, but police assets and naval assets. And especially curiously, they're being asked to mobilize shipping assets, merchant shipping assets. Over 950 merchant ships. The average size of your merchant ship is between 10,000 and 21,000 tons. And they talk about retrofitting 64 10,000-ton ro-ro ships. Well, what gets me about this, the tonnage that they're talking about, and this is just one province in a theater that's not adjoining uh, um, Taiwan, it's too much. You know, I'm trying to do pencil and paper calculations, and a very modest calculation, the 64 ro-ro ships can carry about 64 mechanized brigades. Well, that's over 20 mechanized divisions. That is an impossibly large number, you know, and that includes the logistical vehicles and everything. I mean, so Taiwan is mostly mountain. Taiwan, the flat parts of Taiwan are, a lot of them are urban. It is not a very good place to use large mobile for. You know, nobody's going to use, the United States didn't use mechanized divisions in the Pacific on these islands. You know, Taiwan was an island we didn't invade because it had too darn many troops on it. And, you know, the standing Taiwanese army is 165,000. And supposedly they've got reserves of over 1 million to back that up. How do we invade an island that small with that many troops on it? That's more troops, by the way, than Ukraine has many times over. Look at how big Ukraine is. Look at how small Taiwan is. Does that make sense that anyone in their right mind would physically invade Taiwan?
And with 953 ships in with the 64, now ro-ro ships for the audience, that's roll on, roll off, which
Right.
is for vehicles.
Vehicles.
For normal commerce, ro-ro ships are used, I'm speaking to the audience now, for unloading trucks and cars. They literally will drive off the ship. So
Drive off, drive on, yeah.
This makes it extremely significant because Taiwan, you're not going to need, common sense dictates, you're not going to need over close to 1,000 vessels for that kind of action.
Well, this is like a 500,000 carriage ton of vehicles, right? I mean, just try to imagine it. I mean, the average weight of a combat vehicle in the Chinese army is 20 tons. You know, their heaviest tank, I think, is 47 tons. Most vehicles aren't tanks. They're armored personnel carriers and self-propelled artillery. I mean, you average that down. I mean, how many vehicles, and they're retrofitting them to fit, you know, armor and APCs. It's too much. And that's, by the way, the Normandy invasion, you had, and the other thing about ro-ro ships is you can't come up to a beach and plop them down. They have to come into a port. They have to get a ramp out, right? I mean, maybe there's some kind of mulberry they could set up, but it's a gigantic ship. I mean, how could it couldn't come up to a beach. It's got to have a draft that won't allow it to do that. So we're talking about getting these ships into ports. Well, the Chinese don't control any ports in Taiwan, and it's very hard to get there. I mean, you look at the Normandy invasion, 600 small craft, but the invasion after the 600 small craft is supported like by 150 merchant ships, because the distance between Britain across the English Channel and the landing area is relatively small. The ships can go back and forth, right? So they end up delivering the supplies for the original 7-8 landing divisions, and then they can bring in the 2 army groups that ended up building up after that. So what do you need this kind of tonnage for? I mean, to give you an idea of the tonnage, that this is just one province. I found a paper that suggested, okay, you know, China has 240 companies that run merchant ships, over 2,000 merchant ships. But the real numbers, because China has them flagged with other people and they have front companies that control another companies, it's thought that they have 142 million carriage capacity in ships. Now, some of that, probably, you know, 20, 30 million of it is, you know, not ocean going, right? It's just coastal shipping. But still, now to give you an idea of what that means, Japan invaded, at the time of Pearl Harbor, Japan had 7.7 million tons. And with that, they invaded, They occupied French Indochina, they invaded the Philippines and Indonesia and Borneo, and they invaded New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, and they invaded Malaysia, and they invaded the Aleutian Islands. And if they'd won the battle of, and they took Wake and Guam from us, and if they had won the Battle of Midway, they would have taken Hawaii and Midway. 7.7 million tons. The Chinese, just in this province alone, we don't know the exact tonnage of this 950 ships, but if you just average it as average tonnage, you're talking about more tonnage in this one province that the Japanese had at the beginning of World War II after Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah, this is incredible. Let's hypothesize then, if you had to guess based on defector information, primary source documentation, and your own analysis, how would you hypothesize a Chinese attack against the United States now that we established that this could very well be war planning against the United States?
Right.
What will this look like? What are the stages of the Chinese attack? And will other countries and governments allied to China participate?
Yeah, of course, North Korea, Iran, Russia. Russia's already decoyed a lot of our armed forces to Eastern Europe. What do we got? 110,000 troops we've sent over to NATO now, over to Europe. That's a significant portion of our army. So this is, we're already been distracted. We're using up, I believe we've used 4 years worth of production of these anti-tank rockets. And I think it's similar with the anti-air. Well, probably not as much with the anti-air. I mean, we're using up our ordnance, and we're giving things. The Canadian Army has stripped itself of a lot of important elements from its standing divisions, which it doesn't have very many of, I'm told. So look at this. This is somewhat alarming, this development of mobilization. And see, there's a couple things in this document before I discuss this larger idea of war and an attack, America being the target. There's 2 points in this document. Okay, you got the governor of Guangdong, you've got the head of the military district of Guangdong, and they've got 200 and something tasks and 20 something categories of things to do that they're given by the Central Committee to do. And the ro-ro ships being outfitted is one, but another one is defending their province. And this discussion is very unusual because they talk about this war as the final war. How can a war that's simply an invasion of Taiwan be in any sense final? The other thing, the most interesting person that speaks is a guy who's called the political commissar. His name is Wang Shujin. And he makes the most revealing statements throughout this 56-minute meeting. Probably because he's a political commissar. He has a little bit more freedom to express opinions or to say things than the others do. So one of the things he says is when they're talking about unrest in the cities and the people, losing social control of these large cities in the Pearl River Delta, which is the large population area of Guangdong. This guy says, well, when the people are upset, we need to point out that the American counterattacks on them are responsible for their misfortunes, not us. Blame the Americans. But he uses the term counterattack. At least that's how it's translated in English. And one of the ladies who listened to it, who was a Chinese speaker, felt that there was implied in this part of the text and throughout that they were going to use DF-41s on the U.S. because counterstrike. And in this area, he is referring to the counterstrike when they are talking about what they call the targets in their province that need to be defended. And all the targets they list are strategic targets, like the theater command headquarters, the 4 nuclear power plants in Guangdong, and also the cities and the port facilities. So you're thinking America would strike Guangdong with nuclear. They would, if you would strike a nuclear power plant, that's like a nuclear strike. That implies a nuclear war. That implies a passing beyond a certain bound. That's crossing a line. Why would we attack a Chinese nuclear power plant unless we were attacked with nuclear weapons of some kind, right? Unless there was a nuclear event going on. So it's people are looking at that and going, uh-oh, there's something more going on in this. That is disturbing. And then this guy makes another allusion. Well, they as the whole thing progresses, one of the people says, well, now that war has been decided on, we now know we who we're fighting and we know what we have to do. And they are obviously preparing for something much larger than just Taiwan. This is not just you can see that the magnitude of the preparations. And what he says is this commissar, basically the lockdowns, which are happening throughout China, to over 280 million people locked down, that these lockdowns have proven to be very good for controlling the Chinese people, because to make they call it the transition from normal to war. And they refer to what they're following as the instructions for transition from normal to war. And these lockdowns are the key to controlling the population, to affecting the transition, which talks about dual use civilian military facilities, whether it's ships or industries. And then they talk about, it's very interesting when they talk about the rail carriage capacity. I was looking at this last night. The rail carriage capacity, 588 cars. And you look at where the probable places they would be bringing armored fighting vehicles to these ro-ro ships. Now they're given 45 days to retrofit the ro-ro ships. But it turns out if you do the calculation, that many rail cars would take about 45 days to bring the tanks for the ro-ro ships to the ports. That I found interesting too. I don't know if they're supposed to coincide or whether it's 45 days to outfit the ro-ro ships, 45 days to bring and load probably it's 90 days or more. One of the officials complained that he didn't have the time to really do the ro-ro ships in 45 days. So it's very curious. So I just wanted to, when you look at it, final war, too many ships, strikes against targets in their province from the Americans.
Right.
It's not just
implying that they're going to attack first.
Right. They're planning a war with the U.S. They're planning for a war with the U.S. Now, maybe they think the U.S., remember, is not allied to Taiwan. We're not officially committed to defending Taiwan. So nobody knows if they attack Taiwan if we'll do anything. It's just like with the same situation with Ukraine. And as I said before, attacking Taiwan, which is a freaking impossible, nobody's ever done an amphibious invasion on an island that is that well defended successfully. We contemplated an invasion like that against Japan. It was called Operation Olympic. There was some other names associated. It was if we had to invade Japan, and some experts thought 1 million Americans would die doing that.
Correct.
It's just absolutely. I have seen simulations of that invasion many years ago. I played one of those simulations, and it's just horrific. The death and it's just about impossible to invade islands.
Yeah. The PRC also has a dual track policy towards Taiwan too. On the one hand, yes, they have these military plans which has existed since the nationalist KMT government collapsed in October 1949 and fled to Taiwan. But they've also launched a very aggressive, and it's been quite successful, penetration, economic and political penetration of Taiwanese business interests,
yep,
as well as all the major political parties in Taiwan. They have a tremendous espionage net, traditional espionage net. So they could conceivably also take Taiwan from within. The
Well,
United
you maybe did you read did you read the transcript?
Well, only parts of it that are available in the press. I have not encountered a full transcript.
Um, they refer to in the meeting over 190, between 160 and 190 something civil organizations in Taiwan that they control, that the communists control, that they can use these to cause trouble in the island and help flip the island over. So that almost, when they're talking about that, they're almost sounding like they can force the island to surrender. And when you read that part, you're thinking, well, that is more appropriate to a blockade, because once you invade, everybody gets their solidarity, and nobody wants to go against the government when when there's actual fighting, because then you're undermining your fellow, citizens and stuff. But if you're all starving and you know it's hopeless and you're surrounded and your morale is breaking, then civic organizations rising up within Taiwan calling for let's make a deal, let's stop starving, because Taiwan can't feed itself. If all the Chinese have to do is cut Taiwan off from air and sea, and Taiwan has to eventually give up.
That's right. And Taiwan has also outsourced, particularly its technological sector. They've outsourced their production for at least 20 to 30 years to mainland China, as far back as the 1980s, and particularly in the 90s and onwards. So yeah, there's a serious problems. I mean, China can use the trade weapon against Taiwan to possibly collapse it.
There's militarily no reason to do an actual invasion in this is my opinion as a student of military history. And it's hinted at in this particular part where it talks about civic organizations doing political protests and stuff. But now going on to how they would do this, Colonel Stanislav Lunev had told me that the model for invading the United States was the Hitler's invasion of Norway, Operation Weserübung. And in that operation, Norway was at peace with Germany when Germany began its invasion. And Germany basically used merchant ships they were trading with Norway. They were trading partners, and the merchant ships, instead of being filled with trade goods, were filled with weapons and soldiers. And they didn't come in an invasion fleet. They came singly, like merchant ships do. Here's a merchant ship here, 200 miles that way is another one. And they literally, when they launched the invasion, they would, at the port, they would time. Each vessel would go, and they'd wait so long before they let the next vessel go, because they didn't want the appearance of an invasion fleet. If the ships are all dispersed over hundreds of miles, where's the invasion fleet? You don't see one. You just say, oh, that's just a ship, right? You don't see it. The ocean's very big. And that's how they got away with it. They slipped right by the British Navy, which was mining the Norwegian fjords and harbors. And they got in just at the last minute, and they took the major ports of Norway. And they did have to force their way up Oslo Fjord. So they sent pocket battleships. They sort of forced their way up that way. But in large part, you look at Norway on a map, it's got a huge coastline. They took that with this method. And they also took airfields. They had infiltrators, tourists, go to a depot, get uniforms, get weapons, go take an airfield. Mountain troops fly in. Paratroopers fly in from Germany. Offload on the planes. You control the airport. This is how Lunev said an invasion of the U.S. would be conducted. You probably remember the story in Texas. The Texas legislature actually shut it down. There was a Chinese wind farm in Texas owned by a Chinese general.
Yes.
Who was also a billionaire, and it wasn't a very good place for a wind farm. I understand the wind wasn't ideal. It was sort of a front. But they were building a 10,000-foot runway there, which is the kind of runway that giant military transports that can carry tanks and heavy equipment would need, right, to land.
Correct.
They were building it. Of course, I understand that Texas shut that down because a very clever fellow noticed it and said, "What? Are you letting this happen?" But that's the kind of thing they would be doing, going for to get into the U.S. Then there's Mexico. They could pre-position and infiltrate people into Mexico and Canada, Vancouver area, if they could disguise it, if they could do it undiscovered as part of commercial trade. They could move small weapons, caches, or containers with things in them onto trucks and move them inland and store them or hide them. This is what Lunev discussed as the method, because you need to get in control of ports. You need to get in control of things uh, before the war, because once the war starts, your transports become very vulnerable to being sunk, right? And then, of course, there's the question of how long would it take the Chinese Navy to clear the Pacific? How long would it take them to defeat the US Navy? But imagine if they suddenly took the major ports that our Navy was using by this method, our Navy would not be able to access its own supplies, right? Unless they brought in troops and somehow cleared the Chinese troops. So there's that. And of course, the Chinese could be sending ships with troops to South America, to Central America, to the Panama Canal to seize it, to Australian ports, everywhere they trade with, they could be sending ships, and it would be like simultaneous. At 0 hour on such a date, all these ships arrive at all these ports, and these are, merchant ship can be 10 to 21,000 tons. You could have a appreciable garrison at all kinds of, Auckland, New Zealand, Sydney, Australia, the Panama Canal, that big port they're building in Peru, and on it goes. And if they lose a brigade here or there, or they get cut off or they get destroyed, well, it's all for the good because they have so many men and so many troops. But Taiwan, in the midst of all that, what happens to Taiwan? It just gets buried, right?
Well, global trade will be interrupted, and that will harm Taiwan. And the Taiwan business and political elites are so entwined with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, Taiwan will probably fall. Now, so the PLA soldiers, they're in the ports. I mean, they already started in the 1990s, as you remember, Jeff, infiltrating ports like in Los Angeles. They've always had major presence in the major container ports
Yes.
within the United States. You mentioned the usage of DF-41s. For the audience out there, DF-41s are the most latest Chinese intercontinental ballistic missiles. In fact, if I recall correctly, maybe those DF-41s and DF-31s that were portrayed in one of the Communist Party of China's newspapers, the Global Times, a few years ago, there was this map, and it was reported in the American press, like the Washington Times, which showed a map of the U.S. with explosions on it, which targeted major strategic targets in the United States. So they have the intentions to use these weapons when see fit. Now, in this war scenario, will they use their DF-31s and particularly their 41s against American strategic targets? Where do they come into play?
Yeah, well, I mean, they would naturally attack harbors to destroy all the ships that are anchored. Because at any given time, most of the U.S. Navy's in port. I mean, we got carriers laid up for refits. We've got carriers rotating in and out. We've got lots of warships, needing repairs. And warships aren't constantly at sea all the time. I mean, you look at the boomers, only about a third of our ballistic missile submarines are at sea at any given time, is the normal sort of state. So you'd want to send a ballistic missile directly at the submarine bunkers, destroy as many of them as possible, because submarines are probably the most important type of warship right now, because you can't detect them very easily. And they can do hit and run tactics. They can hide in the ocean. And ours are quieter than the Russian and the Chinese submarines, or so we're told. So that's the class of ship they're probably the most worried about. The surface ships, they've got as we all know, hypersonic missiles, they've got some interesting ballistic anti-ship ballistic missile weapons that have considerable range. Our aircraft carriers are going to be in real danger with these hypersonic weapons because there is no real defense against them for a large capital ship. Something that what is an American aircraft carrier? 80,000-ton ship, right? I mean, that's quite a splendid target for a missile that can split it in half in one blow. So
Yeah, I wanted to mention, because you were one of the few people that reported this. I don't have it in front of me, but if you recall, the BBC ran a story where they were interviewing, I believe, PLA, Chinese PLA sailors, and they
oh,
were forced to retract because they admitted, these sailors, that they were actually preparing for invasion against the continental United States. Do you recall this
oh
report?
yeah,
Have
this
you
was,
about it?
I think this was around 2003 maybe. I'm not remembering. I had done some interviews. I did an interview on a British talk radio show. I don't know how I got the exposure, but this British journalist, she'd had an experience filming a documentary in the South China Sea. The Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy had allowed them to kind of do a documentary filming what they were doing, their exercises, amphibious exercises. Well, unbeknownst to the Chinese, they had Chinese speakers with them, and they started interviewing the sailors. And she said that the sailors were saying, they would ask them, well, how do you feel about, invading, preparing to invade Taiwan? And the sailors would say, well, we're not practicing to invade Taiwan. We're practicing to invade the United States. And one after another of these sailors would make this statement, and they were baffled. And she was kind of taken aback. She wasn't a military, expert of any kind. She was just one of those journalist people. They write about whatever their assignment is. And the Chinese authorities found out what they were doing and found out what the sailors were saying. So they kicked them off the fleet.
God only knows what happened to the sailors for admitting that. They probably were executed, I'm sure.
Well, I have no idea because I think she said that they confiscated the film too. They
Mm,
weren't going to let them walk away with that footage. And so
no.
when she got back to the UK, she started talking to people saying, we had this, we need to look at this. These Chinese are, they're up to something really weird. This is a story here. Everybody shut her up and her career was threatened, she told me. And she felt the reason she reached out to me was nobody had treated her seriously. They all said, look, the media companies are in bed with China. We're going to lose money. You can't talk like this. You're going to offend the higher management. You got to shut up. And she said, look, I got to save my career here. She said, but look, I have a conscience. I have to tell somebody. I asked her, well, why are you telling me? I got to tell somebody who's going to do something with it. So I turned out to be the only person, right, that she told this to. And I thought, well, that's great. I can really prove this, because I said to her, why don't you, you had the experience. Why don't you? And it's like, no, I've already hurt my career enough, was her comment. And of course, what she's saying is as honestly, it's the truth. Look at our trade with China, not just the U.S. but Britain and everybody. I mean, it's like, what are you kidding? The boss is working as the executive in a company that has how many deals with China? How many correspondents in China? How many connections? And the Chinese, they just call up and, somebody from somewhere in China calls up and says, does your company want to operate in China anymore? Get rid of that, woman. Get rid of that troublemaker. That's nonsense. Don't ever repeat that, right?
Yep. Yep. And we talk about trade with China on many shows with you and other guests and my solo live streams. Now, I know you
Well,
have.
let me also, this is interesting because I forgot all about that incident when I've been writing about this. And here you reminded me of it. I had completely, because it was so many years ago, that was, almost 20 years ago. There's this quote from Chi Chen's secret speech, General Chi Chen, the defense minister of China, in 2003. He ends his speech with this following paragraph. As long as we resolve, this is Chinese general talking, as long as we resolve the United States problem at one blow, whatever that sounds like, our domestic problems will all be readily solved. Therefore, our military battle preparation appears to aim at Taiwan, but in fact is aimed at the United States. And the preparation is far beyond the scope of attacking aircraft carriers or satellites. So I'm not just frivolously glomming on to this thing about, you know, the carrying tonnage being too much for an invasion of Taiwan. There's a lot of background here, like those sailors that told the British journalist, no, we're not practicing to invade Taiwan, but America. And this statement by General Chi Chen, the battle preparation appears to aim at Taiwan, but in fact is aimed at the United States. I want to hammer this into people. And then there's Colonel Stanislav Lunev, the GRU defector who spoke fluent Mandarin and lived in and worked in China, who told me, yeah, Russia and China are planning to attack the United States, and it's about an invasion of North America in which the Chinese invade the lower 48 and Russia invades Alaska and Canada.
And let's a lightning round questions because I know you have to go at 9:30.
Right.
What will a surrender, God forbid, of the United States look like? I mean, war plans previously talk about installations of puppet governments, use of the left or elements of the left and other disloyal elements. Others, like General Chi Haoshin's speech talks about depopulation of the United States. What would a surrender in an occupied United States look like? And we don't know if the Russian and Chinese plans changed, too. We just don't know. What's your hypothesis?
Oh, it would be a slaughter. They would, if the Chinese got in here, and they would be, you look at what's happening in Ukraine, you just multiply the atrocities by, 50 or 100. They have no compunction. They will rape, they will pillage, they will loot, they will murder. And their bosses, the generals, will say, you're not doing enough. They want to exterminate, according to Chi Chen, the American people. And, the implication, Dr. Li Meng Yan says they want to use a hemorrhagic fever virus on the United States. They are not totally happy, she says, with this weapon. It's not ideal, but it's what they have, and they think it will serve some purpose. But it looks like, to me, like their biological attack plan has not worked because viral weapons just don't produce the death rate they need. Chi Chen talked about using a biological attack to kill 100 to 200 million Americans. Now, unless there's something about the vaccines that have gone terribly wrong that we don't know, that's not in prospect.
Would there be Americans that would assist the Chinese and the Russians, in your opinion?
Say that again?
Would there be Americans, disloyal, treasonous Americans, that would aid China and Russia in paving the way for their conquests as they're invading and attacking the United States, similar to what happened in World War II, for example, in France, in your opinion?
That the invasion, you mean
When
like
we have
Normandy?
Quislings in the United States helping the Chinese and the
Quizling. Well, Quizling was a Norwegian defense minister who helped with that invasion. Yeah, people don't know the German invasion of Norway had a co-conspirator. It was the defense minister of Norway, Quisling, right?
Yeah, Vidkun Quisling.
Right, and he ended up becoming the Nazi
Minister president.
minister president of Norway after the Nazi occupation. Yeah, of course. I think we have, we just have a lot of Quislings, I think, in our government. I think we got to have a lot of people
Even
who
outside of
collaborate.
government.
Oh, yeah, no, a lot of people in this country like Marxism. I went to school with them. And I know a lot of them personally. They don't like the United States. They don't like the system here. They really like the Chinese system,
And what
communism.
motivates these people? I know we're running out of time, but these are all important points we're making. What motivates these people, the bad elements, the many bad elements within the Marxist-Leninist groups in the United States?
It's an inverted character disorder. It's a character disorder of ontological inversion of values being turned upside down. It's a result of a societal demoralization and basically adopting materialistic beliefs.
So essentially, we're not going to be governed by lambs of God. We're going to be, these are ravenous wolves, basically.
These aren't really people with religious or spiritual values at all. Uh, you know, uh, Communists, Marxist, Leninists are dialectical materialists, and they don't believe in God. They don't believe in spiritual things at all. They don't even believe in morality. I mean,
They're just thugs, murderers. They're basically, pardon the language, I know it's a family-friendly show, but as we would say, they're all effed up essentially in the most profound fashion. And just think, these are the people that could potentially help the invaders of the United
yeah,
States that
yeah,
are.
we have a real problem. I hope we can straighten it out here at the 11th hour with people not knowing who their enemy is. People
And
seem to think their worst enemy is somebody here in America, and it really is. It's these powers overseas that have nuclear weapons and can mobilize large armies and fleets.
and what can we do about it at the 11th hour before we go for tonight?
Well, people need to get oriented. They need to realize the Chinese and the Russians are our enemies. Their allies, the Cubans, the Iranians, the Venezuelan government, all the communist governments, North Korea, Iran, they're a part of their alliance. There's a communist bloc, a China-Russia bloc, and they are serious about destroying us. And it's very hard for people to imagine that this is true. They say, you're crazy. No, they're crazy. I'm not the one that wants to do this. I'm just reporting maybe something you don't want to hear, but something that I've been following a long time because this just didn't come out of nowhere. We've had defective testimony. We've had all kinds of evidence. Look at what Russia's doing. Look at what China's doing. They just don't build up these large nuclear arsenals, these fleets, because they're peace loving. The United States is not threatening these people. I think I like what Michael McFaul said is nobody's threatening to invade Russia. What are they crazy? Nobody would do that. Same thing. There's nobody that's threatening to invade China, you know. So it's there's nobody threatening these countries. So why are they building up their militaries, claiming that they're threatened and being so aggressive?
Well, National Socialist Greater Germany justified their military buildup from the encirclement of France and Britain, and they used that to justify the spread of their power and their revolutionary ideas
Well, in
too.
the case of Germany, Germany was being encircled, but I don't think that Russia and China are being encircled. They're encircling us. You look at Venezuela, you look at what's happening in Nicaragua and now Peru. They're encircling the United States of America.
Well, and now and many of the Western countries like Britain and France, or rather Britain and the United States, our economies have been heavily penetrated by China-friendly interests. And France and Britain, particularly France before World War II, up until the eve of war, amassed huge trade deficits in Germany's favor. And Germany had a lot of clout within the French economy until about 1937 and 1938. And all the same voices calling for free trade and
Yeah.
interchange and
Those things
everything.
will compromise. Having a trade relation with a country that intends to do you harm is not a good idea. And with that, I'm afraid I have to go.
Yep. With that thought, one thing everybody can do to help hopefully sow the seeds of education here. Jeff, what's your website? Where can we get your books?
At jrnyquist.blog, my book, The Fool and His Enemy, you can get on Amazon. It's jrnyquist.blog.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. And of course, we'll have you in the future. God bless and have a good night.
Okay, thank you, Nevin, very much for having me.
Our pleasure.
Okay.